Okay, without further ado, let's get started. I'm really pleased to welcome you guys to building a sourcing strategy to hire the best people today. We're really excited for this webinar, and I want to just walk you through the agenda for today. So first, we're going to meet our two speakers. You should be able to see them on the screen. It's Rob Long and Matt Buckland. And then we're going to go through the first steps in building a sourcing strategy, what those look like, what our speakers' experience has been, and then from there we're going to go into how to find quality people. So you've done the preparation, now it's going out there and actually sourcing. And then part 4 will be the mistakes we see often in sourcing and attraction and how you can avoid those. And then part 5, we're going to go into some of the tools that Matt has used in his career to hire the best people. After that, we'll have a Q&A where you guys can ask our speakers your questions. And feel free to be typing those in throughout the webinar, but we're going to hold answering the questions until the end. Also, this is a question I get very often. We will be sending out a recording to everybody who has registered, so don't fret if you need to jump off at some point. So, Matt, please take it away and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Matt Buckland. I have very recently joined Workable as the VP of Customer Advocacy, and I'm still learning what that title means. In the past 15 years, I have been a recruiter, always hands-on, sometimes running teams for companies big and small. So that's companies as large as Facebook and Bloomberg, right the way down to 3-person startups. And sort of receiving those wish lists from hiring managers and having to deal with them has been my bag for over a decade, unfortunately. I know I look super youthful and at the moment super red as well. But also I'm joined today by the brickwork is doing fantastically well on the complexion compared to me. But Rob as well. Hey Rob.
Hey everyone, so I'm Rob. I'm our VP Product Marketing. Although Matt is new as an employee of Workable, we've actually known each other for probably the best part of 3 or 4 years. I've been with Workable all that time, and through that time I've been working with people like Matt, and Matt directly, in fact, quite a lot. So I spent a lot of time speaking to companies who are growing, who are hiring, who have some of these challenges that hopefully we're gonna talk about today around how we actually make sure that we create a plan that means we can predictably, with some certainty, know that we're actually going to hire great people at the end of a process. And I think that's where we really want to start the conversation today, is what is that first step? So the aim is to hire great people in a predictable way in a time frame that works for the business. Where do we start? Like, what, Matt, for you in your sort of 15 years of experience, what is your first step in that hiring process?
I thought for a horrible moment you said 50 years of experience then. I was going to say, oh, that's quite sad. 15. So for me, the first stage, and I think this is more brutally honest than I think people are normally on these things, the first stage for me is panic, because you have just been given a list of all you're going to do for often the next year, and it's just a wish list. You've got no real insight into that. It's just a list of titles and sometimes some salaries, sometimes not, and you're just told to get on with it. So what I used to do is panic at first and read through that list and worry and get myself het up about it, and then sort of, okay, right, let's talk about this properly. And in doing that, it was much more around going back to the hiring managers, starting to look at that list. Well, first of all, I mean, even for my own sanity, go through that list and check that there wasn't anything too crazy on it. I've had lists before in the past which are developers, traders, a masseuse, traders, and you're like, what? Sorry, go back some. That's a masseuse in there? I've never recorded, never had to find one of those. But to go through and just make sure that you know what all these things are, and then really, as you can see on the screen, start to prepare for these things. That's talk to the hiring managers. So instantly go back to them, and now start that process of really drilling down. I think this is something that we all do a lot, but as recruiters, we like to please people, and I'm guilty of that myself, less so now I get older, but we start to think, how can I make this easier for the hiring manager? I must not take up their time. I must do everything for the hiring manager. And when you do that, you step away from things like questioning their questioning their assumptions about things you know more about. And that's things like the market, questioning things like how they're doing the things they do, why they're doing the things they do, what that job description means. Is this even a real job description? Is it 2 people compressed into 1 for half of the salary, which I see quite a lot. Well,
I think what we were talking about there is that it's that initial, like you say, you get that list of jobs, and that first step is really to understand that list of jobs. And so on a per job basis, it's that relationship that you have with the hiring manager, which is the place you start. I know from my experience, from my recruitment days before Workable, then as a hiring manager at Workable, I always start that process with our recruiter Elizabeth with that sort of kick-off meeting about a particular role where she's looking to get into, really understand that role and what's required. Is that your experience of it as well, and how do you make that meeting go well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would go straight back to the hiring manager and start to talk to them about the roles that they were looking for. I want to understand if it's something they've done where they've actually amalgamated 2 roles into 1, whether these things actually exist, whether they have the budget for these things. So recruiters do themselves a great injustice by not realizing that you actually have more market information a lot of the time than the hiring manager that you're doing business with. There's a lot that they'll have just written. I think that the worst thing that a hiring manager's done to me is to pull out that bottom drawer hiring description, blow the dust off it, and then put it in front of you and say, this is what I want. And you're like, is it really? Let's talk about that. Let's go through this line by line. What you're doing there is 2 things. You're gauging your own understanding, so you're gaining a deeper understanding of the role, but you're also pushing back on that hiring manager a little bit and making sure that those things are still relevant. I've had experience where on reading the job description with me, he suddenly decided, actually, we don't use that technology anymore. I don't know why that's in there, and started crossing it out. It was going to be one of the first things I looked for. So it's a great way to sort of stop that time suck. There's a great technique called 5 whys, which you can use as well with people. So why do we need that? But why? But why? But why? And they say that the 5th why is when you get to the truth. So a lot of the time, we're exposed to other things in hiring which aren't necessarily just here's a completely new person. It's like we need this person with those skills because our incumbent person doesn't like doing that thing. So we need this person to do the things he hates. And you're like, okay, that's a terrible job. I can't really recruit for that. Let's go and talk about this a bit more. So there's all these wonderful reasons. I think there's the 5 whys, and then there's also, as I say, is help me to understand. This is a fantastic question that I use all the time. I think people get wise to it, and they know I'm being a bit passive-aggressive with it. But it's help me to understand, not what's this, why is this. If you ask someone for help, you're completely more inclined to get a lot of help. They are predisposed to do that. And remember, you're on the same team as your hiring manager as well, so they should be doing this. I think
one of the things I see, Matt, just on that point, is the hiring manager that wants everything, right? They sort of, if you ask someone what they want, and do you want this, do you want this, the answer is, yeah, I want that, I want everything. I want this person that probably doesn't exist. And I rely on our recruiter to sort of keep me honest and say, you know, Rob, 3 of these 10 things that you said you wanted, how important really are they to me when I'm speaking to people or sort of screening resumes or going out and searching for people? Like, what's actually important about this role? It's that sort of, why do you need this? Like, is this something you could train? Is this a core requirement? Or is it just, I asked you to write down some stuff that you quite like and you listed 100 things?
I think that's absolutely right. There's this kind of nice to have and must haves, and we're quite good at writing them when we write job ads. You must do this, you must do this, it'd be nice if you were this. But internally, some hiring managers are a little bit more demanding and would rather push back on you and say, no, I must have all of these things. So I have experience of combining a very, very new technology with a very old technology, for example. And I push back on the hiring manager and say things like, well, where would this person have had that experience? You know, what company would use this super old technology, and is it just ours? Are there other ones out there like this? And you can get a better handle on it from their understanding.
And I think a lot of that, a lot of us spoke about so far, are getting saying what the business needs in this new hiring manager is looking for. But there's another side to it as well, right? Which is, why is this going to be interesting or appealing does want to come and do this. So from a candidate's point of view, why would I do this role? What's interesting? How do you make sure that when you're having this conversation with the hiring manager, you can draw out that information as well, that you're going to go and take to market and ask people to go and make a life-changing decision to come and work with your company to do this?
Yeah, I think that's one of the more important things as well. We start to move from job description to job advert. So a job description is your internal tool. It's your HR tool that's almost like a contract of employment. You're going to do these things for this much money. Thanks very much. A job advert is the big explosions. I gave an example previously of when you buy a car, you might look at the manual for the car, but it's quite a dry way of looking at it. The other way to buy a car is to look at a TV advert for a car where there's a cornfield on fire and the car blowing up around it, and all of this wonderful. The car doesn't blow up in adverts. That's normally a safety thing, but you get the idea. There's normally like a Jerry Bruckheimer version of the manual. It's not quite the same thing. We're very guilty, I think, a lot of the time of here is a job description, and we take that as read. A job description is quite a dry artifact. You really need some color with that. So that's kind of the base level of Maslow, where this is the base kind of just what we need. Further up from this, you get into things like, what does it mean to be in this company? Why am I here? What's my personal growth? Why do I enjoy being here? And those can be lots of different things. So I would question the hiring manager at this stage, because you're going to pull those sort of things out of him or her. Why are they here? Why do they choose this company? Why do they enjoy being there? And it's those things which are going to make it saleable later on in the process.
One of the things that I find, like when I'm sort of hiring for a new role, like I can be that person in that chair that the recruiter's saying, well, why would someone want to come and work in your team in this company in this particular role? And sometimes the way I answer that is actually, okay, well, here's my opinion as the hiring manager, but I want to go and speak to the other sort of 60 people in the office and say, look, why do you work here? Like, what is it about the work that you do that actually keeps you engaged, keeps you motivated? And there's loads of information there. Like, it's beyond that recruiter and hiring manager conversation. It's actually going out into the room and saying, well, look, 60, 100, 300, however many people you've got in your office, they've all made that decision. They've all said yes to working here.
Yeah. And that's a brilliant way of doing it, because it's much more authentic. I think if you have a company line, we are the most innovative company in X, whatever X is, it gets a bit staid at the end. It's like, well, obviously you'd say that. But if you can say, I work here because, I mean, we're a bit further on in the process now, we might be talking to a candidate, but if you're saying, well, I work here, the things I like are this, or the developers here love this, or the people in marketing here love this, and the team all work together because of this, you're in a much better state there. It's much more authentic than just sort of being a vox pop. I think we forget that the people we're hiring are just as intelligent as us. In my case, a lot more so, often. So if you just try and sell to them in a naked sort of, here we go, this is the best company in the world, it's like, well, no, I don't believe you. You have to say that.
And I think there's sometimes a temptation. I've certainly seen job descriptions. I think there's thousands of job descriptions that look like this, where that introductory paragraph is the same copy that a company has on their website trying to sell the product to a customer. And that isn't the sort of used to try
and things like, it's why would people be interested? So a lot of startups, they'll have who invested in the company. And once you get a little bit further along, to start out with, you probably want that information. That's probably around security. But once you're a little bit bigger, you should probably have a better and more compelling story than who gave you money. There should be something that bubbles up that's just unique to you, rather than, hey, that guy trusted us to give us our money, we won't go bankrupt.
And I think one of the things now, and this sort of, to try and sort of wrap up, I guess, the preparation piece, talking about job adverts, and one obvious use for job adverts, if you're going to go and use them, they're going to go on your career sites, they're going to be publicly facing the way you talk about the company, they're going to go on sort of job boards, and you want them to be appealing. But also, I think part of that process of creating a really good job ad, which is a really specific skill for a recruiter as well, I think, is that you're starting to understand yourself why this is appealing. Because down further in the process, you're going to have to speak to people and explain to them, beyond the scope of the job ad, why this is a role that's interesting. You're going to have to some extent, sort of sell this role and this company to somebody. And I think you're doing the groundwork now to create a job ad, but all of that work, that conversation with recruiters, members, is going to be very helpful down the line. Yeah,
there's a tendency to jump ahead of yourself and just go straight out to market with something. And there's I think it's great practice to write that job advert first, to take the job description and to understand what are those saleable elements, what are the things that people are going to engage with. And that's very different for each type of person in your organization. So I don't think there's an organization that has just one culture that you're selling. We'll have a developer culture, we'll have a marketing culture, we'll have a sales culture, and all of those things will be different, and people will want different things from this.
There's some testing you can do internally before you take that to market. I think it comes back to, so recently we're hiring a product marketing associate. So we created this job ad, and I thought this was fantastic. This is the best job ad I'd ever been part of creating. And so I wanted to sort of see if this was true. So I took it to one of our existing product marketing associates and said, hey, does this reflect the role that you do? Like, and B, would this appeal to you? Like, you've taken this job, would this job ad sort of appeal to you? And actually the answer was no. Like, I'd actually missed some of the points that were great about this job. Like, the things that were, for Bora, for the product marketing side, really the best things about a job, they weren't in there. So we could play around with it a little bit, make it change. And then also I took it outside the company to someone I knew in product marketing who I really rated. I just knew I couldn't hire because of timing, and said, look, you know that you're someone that I'd really like to hire. Would this job ad appeal to you if the timing was right? And got some good feedback there as well to make sure that when we took it out publicly, it was a really tight advert.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest objections I ever had working for a very large sort of tier 1 tech company who shall remain nameless, our go-to-market was, everything here is brilliant, it's amazing, it's perfect. And every software engineer I spoke to said, well, why would I want to come and work then? There was nothing left to do.
Yeah, what am I going to do that's interesting, exciting to help move the company along? Well, look, I think this is a great start, and I think this is how, certainly from my experience, it works best. That if you do this upfront work, you tend to see the rewards down the line. So I think if we look at then the next step, so we've done this groundwork, we've got a great job ad, we've got a really good understanding of the role, what the hiring manager is looking for. What's next? How do we actually then do the really important thing of going out to market and trying to get people interested in this?
So I'm, again, bucking the trend on this one, because the first thing I do is advertise the job. And I know that people have tuned in for this for sourcing facts, and they probably want that sexy new sourcer stuff. But there's a baseline level, and I'll tell you why it's important. For me, I want to write a great, compelling job ad, and I want everyone to see it. I want the world to have eyes on that. There's a couple of reasons why. The first one, I may get lucky. That's that simple. I might get a very easy hire, and this has happened to me quite a lot in my career. I've hired a CMO off the back of a job ad. I've hired heads of digital, heads of talent, vice president of engineering, just from a tweet of a job ad. So these things do happen, and they're great when they do. Less than people expect, but I think there's a great sort of we jump too soon. We jump too soon into these into the sexier ways of recruiting, and we forget that just a job board is actually a place where people go to look for jobs. The second reason, and perhaps the more important, is I'm testing my assumptions that I've made in that job description. So I've taken a job description, I've turned it into a job ad, I've made all these assumptions about what's going to be exciting to someone, how am I going to sell it to someone, who am I testing that on? I go straight to a job board and see what type of applications we get. Really interestingly, I also, and this is a workable specific thing because I was able to A/B test job titles. So I had more or less the same copy, sorry job boards, but it was more or less the same copy with a different title, because when people search for jobs, they search for the title. If you're a lead marketer at the moment and you're looking for a head of marketing role, you probably don't look for lead marketer, which is what I was writing, but I could call it a head of marketing and then talk to you about it. Titles were kind of transient in my company, in previous companies, so you could have different titles. I know it's a bit more formalized in some companies, but you've got a little bit of leeway. We had a lead marketer, it was a head of marketing role, so it was lead marketer, head of marketer, growth marketer, growth hacker, all the same role, just one job, one person we needed, 4 different job titles, and we're able to look across the entire cross-section of that talent pool and see what kind of people resonated that message, what kind of people did that resonate with. So it was, we had people who had applied from smaller startups, we had a global head of marketing from a company, a tech company that everyone would have heard of, and it's the same role, you're doing the same stuff, The salary hasn't changed. It's just because I changed the title, and suddenly I had option on all of these big heavy hitters and the smaller people at the bottom of the funnel as well, and that was crazy to me. But that's that. So posting on a job ad, posting on job boards, I think is actually brilliant. It's my guilty secret that in a lot of companies, I actually fill a lot of jobs by ad response. And I know that there'll be people watching this going, oh, that's terrible. You're evil for doing that. You should be Googling their dog's name from a tag that you found, maybe kidnapping their dog to get their phone number, you know, that kind of stuff. No, if there's an easy way to do something, I would prefer to do it the easy way. And if you work somewhere where you've got 200 jobs to fill or 300 jobs to fill, you know, you've got a big round of funding and you've just gone like this, then you need to get and do those more exciting, all the mundane things have to happen as well as the exciting thing.
It's the thing that you can't hide by telepathy. Like, your job needs to be out there for people to know it's happening, right?
Exactly. Or you're only spearfishing.
We all know that sort of not every job gets filled that way, right? Like, this would be the golden situation. We create a sexy job ad and it's really appealing and people want it. We put it on all the job boards and our careers site, and bang, 2 days later someone's applied. And look, that does happen, but it's not always the case. So I guess then you start, okay, what other weapons do we have in the arsenal to actually go and find these people or to get this role in front of people? And how do you actually plan for that? Is it that you start with the easy and sort of progressively as time goes on and you start getting more panicked that you haven't got the right people, that you start doing other things? Or is there another way? Is there a better way?
Well, I think people have an assumption that when they do this, it's like you do this thing first, then this thing, then this thing, then this thing. And I've never done it that way. Why don't you start looking for people based on the assumption you have and then refine that as well as advertise at the same time? The two things can overlap. I think it's more around prioritization of your time when it comes to sourcing. So there are some roles which you should source for and some roles that you should probably just wait for ad response for. But you'll know the cadence of those better for your company. So you can listen to all of the webinars you want and not get the perfect answer for your company because we don't work for your company. I think it's more likely that you're going to recruit for those more niche roles. You're going to find those better through sourcing. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't advertise, and neither does it mean that you should advertise and then wait 4 weeks and then see if you can go and find someone. Because in 4 weeks' time, you've probably got a hiring manager stood behind you just breathing down your neck repeatedly as you're like feverishly typing into LinkedIn. Been there. Been there, been there. So there's nothing to stop you once you're sort of tweezing things out of this, of your job description out of this process, to then go straight back out to people and to start looking for that. And I think traditional search, now it starts on LinkedIn. I'm so old, but I remember a time before LinkedIn, but we still had CV databases. We were still doing the same stuff. LinkedIn, and you're going to start looking. Do these people exist? Is this the unicorn that the hiring manager wants me to get to? And you'll start, because you've had that hiring manager conversation, you're going to start to pick up on very different things as well. So you're going to pick up on maybe where they're at in their current career. You know, is this a management position? Okay, well, I'll go back to my hiring manager and say, do they need to have been a manager before? Can they have been a lead dev in a team, in a smaller squad of 5, and then now we're going to get them managing 10 people? Would that be okay? Because I'm not looking like for like, and I think a lot of the time we don't recruit for that sort of talent and growth opportunity. A lot of the time we recruit like for like, but that hiring manager conversation cuts through that to do this sort of stuff. So first stage, I go to LinkedIn, I see if the person exists. I might message a few, just see what happens. But I'm doing that at the same time as I'm advertising. Interestingly, I would probably use one of the Chrome extensions or People Search or to find an email address, because in my experience, if I am trying to message someone and I email them, they'll get it on their phone versus an in-mail or another way of contact which will go to a pocket somewhere, something that they haven't got set up. So I'd be looking for an email address as that sort of golden line of communication to them. I'm not a fan of cold calling, but that was my market. So again, I don't know your businesses, so cold calling might be the way that people want to get contacted. I know in my very limited sales hiring career, I was terrible at it. If you recruit salespeople, you're a god. In my limited hiring of salespeople, they did respond better to a call, and they would always take the call. If you're hiring sort of in the insurance industry. A friend of mine hires for insurance, and he had sort of the strange mathematicians that live in the back rooms of insurance companies. That was where that was his sweet spot. They didn't know what a phone was. They barely saw light. So you had to email or a letter under the door or something like that to get to them.
And so I think one of the things that we've gone over there is that, like you say, it's not sort of you do one thing, wait to see if it works, then try the next thing, wait to see if it works. Because I don't think anyone's got that luxury of time that they can do it that way. But also, most people aren't in the luxurious position that they're just hiring for one position. I don't know any recruiters. I don't remember ever in recruitment having one role I had to fill. There was always multiple ones. So
if you have, you're probably looking for your new role yourself as well.
Yeah, at the same time. And so yeah, well, in recruitment, yes. But that prioritization of where you can spend the time, like we don't have unlimited resources. It's actually looking at, okay, here's the 10 or 20 open recs that I'm hiring for. And I think that's where the communication between recruiter and hiring manager has to be ongoing. It's not sort of a fire and forget relationship. It's like the job ad. You don't create the job ad and then just keep that forever. You iterate on it. It works, you tweak it. And I think that's where working with the recruiter, if you're getting those sort of regular updates, whether it's a weekly update on, okay, hey, these are the people we've got, how do they look, are we on the right lines, next week we're going to focus here and try and get more of this, does it sound right? I personally find that really helpful from the recruitment team.
I think one of the major things for me is don't apologize for what you're doing. There's a tendency where, certainly in the larger corporates I've worked in, people say, oh, we can't waste the hiring manager's time. You're not wasting his time or her time by going back to them and saying, look, I found this person. Are they right? I think they might be right because of this. This is probably not right, though. Am I right? Am I on the right track? What you're doing is both showing progress, which they will love, but also refining your search criteria constantly as well. And that's the constant feedback loop. There's nothing to say that you can't go back and rewrite that job description because of something you've discovered. Or something that changes. Obviously, you'd rewrite it then, but you can change it all the time and update. And there you go. Look, now there's a new job. It doesn't change for the people who have already applied. They might be right, they might be wrong, but you're still going to learn more. It's a constant feedback loop. I think we have. We need to move from this kind of transactional process of incoming candidate to the hiring manager. That way, you're just a conduit. This is an iterative process. This is something where you're going to get better and better and better. Think of it as moving closer to the end hire all the time, rather than just sort of giving it up and saying, oh, here's a person, do you like that person? Here's a person, do you like that person? Over and over again. That's not the skill that you have, or the skill that you want to show to a hiring manager.
It's the value add. Like the best recruiters that I've worked with, they've provided that sort of value add. It's not just, here's a resume, do you want to interview them? It's actually way more up to date and actually giving you that market knowledge, which the recruiter has far more than the hiring manager. And I think, to your point around sort of the hiring manager, hiring for them is probably their most important thing they're doing right now. Like when they look at their own goals for a quarter or for a year, the one thing that is going to stop them doing that is not hiring, or hiring too slow, or hiring the wrong person. So I think for every hiring manager, and certainly anyone sort of director or sort of VP level, the thing that's going to get them to hit their goals actually is probably more closely related to hiring than you think. So you are a really important person to them. Like your success is their success, and they want to help. Like, I want to help the recruitment team understand my roles. I want to give them everything they need to make sure that they're able to do their jobs, because I know that's what they're the experts for. It's not just resume shuffling. It's way more than that.
Yeah, I think that's a misnomer that that some people get stuck into as well. I've seen some teams where they start to be set up like that, and as soon as you start to pay a bit more attention to a hiring manager, say, hey, look, you worked at this company, are those people okay? They love it. Anything like that, which is an interaction that they feel is getting you closer, more understanding, they will love it. And if it's not the most important thing, it's certainly one of the most expensive things that they're going to do for their team for that year. And that's normally enough to make them pay attention.
One of the things we haven't spoken about at the moment, and I know this is top of mind for a lot of people, is sort of third-party recruiters. Like, when do you make that decision to say, this particular rec is going to require external support from a third-party recruiter? It's probably the most expensive way that you're going to hire someone. There's an aversion to doing it for that, particularly if you've got an in-house recruitment team. But how do you make that decision to say, right, we're going to drop $10,000, $30,000 on a hire, or 6 figures plus if you're looking at executive hire, or bringing in someone externally? Like, when do you make that decision?
I think I think as recruiters, we tend to be a little bit snobby as soon as we go in-house. Certainly, a lot of the recruiters I know and friends with used to be agency recruiters. I did as well. You as well. God, that was terrible. Or we all started somewhere. So, but as soon as you take that in-house role, now you go, I hate recruiters. And it's like, but you were one. It's like from 1 week to the next, you've gone from loving this way of working to hating it. I don't follow that. I think third-party recruiters, for me, in my career, have been a luxury. So for me to use them, it's always been cost-effective. What's my cost benefit for this? So I must get value out of this. And they're the value. What can I use them for? What can I add? What can I use them as an additive for? Rather than them just trying to circumvent me and send CVs. Here are 5 CVs to my hiring manager, which seems to be a lot of the way sort of a lower level. But there's bad recruiters on both sides, right? So that's their equivalent of our resume shuffler. What I want from an agency is true partnership. I want to tell them where I've already advertised, how I'm advertising it, what I'm doing it, and why I'm doing it. I'll give them all that information, and I want them to do something different. I want them to find a piece of the market that I haven't got to, and to work from that viewpoint. I think the speed and the costs are the benefits that they have, but that's if you don't have the time. I mean, if you've just inherited that list of 200 requisitions to fill, you better be doing something. There are going to be things where, I don't know, someone's just left the business, you need to fill them faster. You need to fill that bucket faster. You need to see more of the bucket faster. You need to see more of the market faster. Then I'd say they're a viable opportunity. But certainly make the hiring manager aware of that. I wouldn't be too swayed by the magic that recruiters have access to candidates that we as in-house recruiters do not. That is not true. LinkedIn killed that for them. I mean, I used to say that. So the same way I used to get sold to, now I still get sold to. The same way I used to sell, I still get sold to, rather, which is like, oh, this candidate only wants to be represented by me. That's a bad candidate. If I entrust my entire career to this one person and here's my golden edge CV, don't hire that person. There's probably some serious doubts around who that person is. Similarly, like the exclusivity, I have this candidate that no one else does. Here are 5 CVs that match your requirements. I mean, they're all sales techniques. It's better to say, okay, let's have a different conversation, Mr. Agency. Let's not do that. Let's go straight into how you can add value to me, and this is how you can. Don't be talked to. Actually utilize them in the form they were meant to be, which is augment what I've already got. Build, you're bolting bits onto your process and your sourcing activity, much rather than having them dictate.
I think my experience from sort of agency days before Workable was that the companies and the sort of in-house recruiters, and I've been on both sides, where you have that experience, which is, well, we'll send you the job description, but that's it. You'll have that, and then now send us resumes. When I speak to the hiring manager about this, you have preparation. No. I speak to HR. No. Here's the job description. It's basically go to our careers page and take a punt. And I think that's where people get really frustrated with recruiters because they send irrelevant candidates.
It's frustration for both sides, right? I mean, what a way to set someone up to fail. It's like, yeah, I want you to find me brilliant people for my company because my company is important to me. Brilliant. Can I do this? No. Can I speak to the team? No. Can I do that? No. Well, if you can't, you better be the source of all knowledge for that person. You better have that. And you're only going to do that if you've done those steps of talking to the hiring manager, keeping that feedback loop going. If you are the one point of knowledge, the fully informed individual, they won't ask to speak to a hiring manager because they won't need to. That's it.
So, mindful of sort of time and moving on and thinking about the common mistakes that you've seen or perhaps done, dare I say, you might have made a mistake in your career so far. What are the sort of most common or biggest mistakes that you see yourself or your teams or other companies making when it comes to sourcing and attracting candidates?
So I think the biggest one for me, and when we were talking about this webinar being about sourcing, the biggest one for me at the moment, the biggest mistake that people make is falling in love with the art and science of sourcing over the art of hiring someone. And I'll explain a little bit further. There are many, many easy ways to hire people. People get hired for strange companies, and they get hired in horrible processes, and they still get hired and they still work in companies. So it doesn't matter really as much what that process is, what that looks like. You control the things you can control. There's, with the growth of sort of the sourcer as someone to be respected, there's a tendency on their part, I think, to overcomplicate a lot of the time. And I refer to some of the stranger examples that I've encountered. So earlier on I made that joke about finding someone's telephone number by their stolen dog's tags around its neck. But there are people who make a career out of this kind of stuff. So people who have done look people up on Google Maps, for example, or found people. It seems to be that there was much greater benefit in finding someone who didn't want to be found, and that's strange for me. So someone on Tinder, for example, there was someone who, yeah, I recruited this person on Tinder. And it's like, well, didn't that just annoy everyone else on Tinder? It's like you're using something that's not meant for recruitment just because you can. And it's, I think the danger is, and I'm going to alienate all the sources on the call, is it might be more about them than the candidate or the company. So we're getting, it's like we have a bias towards things that we found and gone through, we've labored to find the thing, so we think it's worth more. If a pirate marches all over the island to find the X marks the spot, it's better than if he just lucked into some gold sometime. That's just grog money. So that's one of my major ones, that we don't do the easy stuff. So the easy message should be the first thing you do. Get them out the door, boom, done. Because the hiring manager ultimately just wants great people. Like, I've never hired someone and then had a hiring manager going, oh, but did they come from Tinder? It's very important that this person came from, they don't care. They just care about hires. And the higher up, sort of the older you get, the longer in your career, you care less too. It's more that you just want the right people at the right time. And where they come from is like, oh, I don't know where they came from. You're mindful of the fact that you need to know where they came from because you might want to invest in the source, but the source shouldn't be king. The other one, we came into it a little bit there, passive versus active. Again, all candidates are active. If they've applied, if they respond to you in any way, they are active. The only passive candidate is a dead candidate, and it might be the ultimate diversity criteria, but I've never employed a dead person. If they're out there on job boards, if they've picked up the phone to you, if they're anything like that, they are an active candidate from there. It doesn't matter that you found them or that they applied or where this stuff came from. They're all the same at that point. They are all active. I think there's also a danger that when we get the use of technology, we use things in a mass mail out kind of way. Just because we can write a template and make it sound personal to one person doesn't mean the same template will sound personal to the next 5 million that you just hit send on just because the technology allows you to. Better to do those reach outs and to really understand what headhunting is. Headhunting is where you found the person and you're after him or her. I mean, you're aimed at that person. You're not. I'm headhunting 200 people. That's not headhunting. That's just recruitment again. Headhunting used to be your secret black book in the city of London where you would look for stockbrokers who only existed and you knew them and all that kind of stuff. LinkedIn killed that because suddenly there was a great democratization of this skill. Everyone knew everyone. It's easy to find people. It's hard to engage those people.
And I think sometimes the myth that good people don't look for jobs is what it is. It's a myth. Good people do. I've hired good people from job boards. In fact, I think most people I've hired have come from job boards ultimately, and they've been good people. They look on job boards. They need to get new jobs. They might have to leave a certain job. I think that's that sort of myth that, well, good people never look for jobs because they've got a great job, and why would they look elsewhere because they're smart and hired by companies?
I think if that were true, no one would ever leave companies like Google or Facebook, but we know they do. So why do they? I mean, that doesn't tie up in your heads. We hold one truth to be absolutely true and fundamental, and then over here we're like, well, yeah, but I won't bother contacting him. I'm like, well, that's really limiting. Or I'll contact every single person who works at Google for this job in the same way. So, well, why would they care? The same level of care as you put in, you get out again. And I think, as you say, a great rejoinder I've had to people who said good people don't apply. It's like, how did you find your job? Because a lot of the time they've applied.
So I'm looking at the time. We've got one more thing to discuss before we do Q&A. I think there's a few questions lined up. I just want to make sure we've got time for that. When it comes to the technology you use, like how do you actually make sure that you're using the right tools to hire the best people? Like, what's helped you most, whether it's a tool or elsewhere? Hot tips on that.
I think something that helps you move quicker is always the best tool. I don't want to fall in love with the method and not the actual outcome of the tool. So I want things to help me work faster in the way I want to work. That will be things like the great examples that I've had so far. Something that lets me post to multiple job boards to start with, because I'm testing that marketplace. Workable did that for me quite well when I was recruiting, because you could test all those different job boards. I think I was posting to 16 with each different ad that I had, and then it would come back, and I would be able to get that marketplace, sort of that map of the market of who was available, who was looking, what sort of skill set they had very quickly. That's that kind of multiple posting. I remember back in the midst of time where you used to have to cut and paste your job ad to all of those different jobs. Now, there will be people who are listening who think, God, that's insane. Why would you ever do that? Well, we used to. That's the way we used to do it. I think something that facilitates the interactivity between you and the hiring manager as well. If you're using a good ATS, you will get that interaction because you can bat things back and forth. I think I look at people without using something like an ATS where, in fact, what they're doing is emailing someone, you have that lag, then they email back, you have that lag, then your time to hire just zooms in size. It's just like, wow, okay, suddenly this is taking days because I didn't know someone was on holiday and then that guy's left and this kind of all of this sort of stuff. I think there's a wealth of tools out there now. I think as I was a workable user, I used People Search. This is a paid search tool that will, you type in someone's name or skill set and it will return those people, but it also has their contact details. That's the thin end of the wedge because you still have to engage them, you still have to talk to them in the right way. That is the secret of sourcing, everyone, the engagement piece. But you still need to know where, it's not telepathy again. You can't use that, we've already established it. So you still have to find these people and engage them in a way. But finding them and finding a good contact method for them is probably one of the first things. And then I guess I'd say use other tools for writing great job descriptions as well. There are a number of things around. You should be using things like the gender decoder, which will tell you if you're veering towards male-oriented or female-oriented language because you're cutting your audience in half. You should be using things like Grammarly to make sure that you haven't spelled things incorrectly or that your sentence structure is right. And these are all free tools as well. So I think it's looking at the skill set. I want to write better copy and understanding there's a tool for that, not just like I want to do everything all at once all real well and do that one thing. I think there are a number of different tools, and there are probably about 20 different webinars of an hour long on each of those stages.
Maybe next year we can get onto those.
Yeah.
So I want to get into the Q&A. We've had questions coming through. I want to give people a little bit of time to think now if there's any questions they want to add, and then we'll jump into them. So give you sort of 30, 40 seconds to do that. And Aaron, I think you've got a poll for everyone.
Yeah, so while you're doing your questions for us, we actually have a question for you. So if you should see that popping up on your screen right now. And just as you're typing in your questions, you can take a couple seconds to answer that. Okay, so let's start getting into these questions. See what you guys have asked. Somebody asked, actually, just for clarification, for the name of the tool to not have gender bias. I know a lot of people are concerned about diversity.
Yep, so I use something called the Gender Decoder. It's free, and it's by a lady called Karen Matanen. If you just Google Gender Decoder, you will come up with that tool. You paste your job ad in, it will come up with, and it's loosely based on a white paper. There are much more advanced tools that do the same sort of thing, but I was in a situation where I couldn't afford those tools, so I had to make do. Perfect.
We also had another question. So do you have tips for how I can source for non-tech related jobs? I know you had asked, I mean, you have been speaking from, you know, your tech perspective, but what can you tell those people who might be not in that industry?
Yeah, so there's a number of different places. I think one of the good examples of this, I have a friend who recruits for chemists and scientists, for example. I wouldn't know what to do. He has a great line where he looks for them on Google Scholar. and Google Scholar is sort of the zenith of all of your PhDs, all of your thesis. And he will look through those and look at where the original research came from. So PhDs are structured normally in such a way as you're always building on the work of other people. So from sort of the crediting, he can build up a picture of who is who in this. After a while, he knew what sort of who the best professors were that you had worked with, and this kind of stuff as well. So I'd say Google Scholar is a great one. I'd also look at people who go to events in a certain industry. So things like meetup.com normally have an attendee list, which you can find and search through the attendee list. And that's the same for sort of professional and trade bodies and stuff like that. Often trade shows, that kind of stuff, will publish a list of who attended last year, who the speakers were, that kind of stuff. And that's gold dust for you if you're just looking for that name and that first way to make contact.
I think it's from my side as well, like going back to, I guess, the base level, that kind of job board piece, is that there are kind of the players, like Indeed is a huge driver of that. It's like great tool for loads of different roles, but niche job boards exist as well, and they spend a lot of time trying to sort of generate an audience around a particular skill set, whether that sort of could be finance. Finance is actually one where niche job boards tend to work really well, and so when you're looking at those different channels, are there niche boards that you can be using to sort of supplement some of the bigger, more sort of generic job boards that will drive traffic? These niche job boards tend not to drive the quantity you get from, say, LinkedIn or Indeed, but they tend to be a bit more specialized. So e-financial careers for finance candidates, Stack Overflow for tech candidates. So have a bit of a look around and see what's out there. I know we have people using Workable Listening, so if they are, then have a look what Workable recommends. We'll recommend the niche job boards that you should be using.
Yep.
Most Workable. Some of them are premium ones, which means pay. Others are going to be the free job boards, but I think it's worth having a look.
Great, thank you. We have another question. Somebody said our interview process includes a pre-employment assessment. How do you suggest integrating this into our sourcing conversations?
So my assumption there is that before that candidate gets to speak to someone at the company, they have to do a test. I've never done that. I've always spoken to someone before I've had to then go and do a test, because I've had to get perhaps a little bit more buy-in into the process for them to go and spend 30 minutes, an hour to go and do it. But that's not to say I don't think it can work. I think it's setting expectations up front, that it doesn't become sort of bait and switch, that someone sort of sends details and then you're not willing to do anything until you do. It might work in some industries and for some jobs. I've never had experience of doing that. I don't know whether, Matt, you've come across that as examples of it.
No, I normally have to try and coerce people to take tests in my experience. However, I have seen some things work to convince people not to do it that way or to change those tests, and that's to run both processes at the same time. Slightly different job title again, and then to say to the hiring manager, hey, how about we just move the phone screen before and then get the test? Particularly if you're experiencing quite a lot of dropout of your interview process as well. So I think my message to that person would be, have a look at your process and see where people are falling out of your process to start with. So if you have sort of 1,000 people looking at your careers page, they click apply and then they get a test, and then only 3 of them bother to do the test, maybe look at moving it a little further down the process, just so that you get a chance to give them some of that engagement. So it's more of a quid pro quo at that point, rather than just having, hey, come here, do this test. That's like going up to someone in the street and saying, do this test, do this test. And they go, no, I don't want to, thanks. Especially if you've got this kind of, if you're doing both of the things at the same time. So they apply, they might want to do a test. It might be a hurdle they have to go through. But also reach outs to those people are going to be quite difficult to then say immediately. It gets that bait and switch feel, as Rob, you were saying. It's hey, do this test. It just doesn't feel so good. So I try and convince that hiring manager, I would personally try and convince that hiring manager to move it later into the process.
I mean, I can see it certainly in high volume hiring situations, so I can imagine like staffing up a 200-person call center or customer service desk from scratch, where you're expecting a huge volume, and you can accept there maybe that drop off from sort of applying to test.
But then it's doing a different job.
Yeah, I think then it's just being, I think there, just from a sort of experience point of view for the candidate, just being upfront about it. If it's not actually part of the application form, If they're going to apply and then they're going to get an automated email that says, hey, thanks for applying, I'll take this an hour-long test, tell them on the application form. Say, look,
oh yeah, definitely.
The application form, we're going to send you a test you need to complete to be considered for this role. I think then everyone's expectations are aligned and you're okay. I can see where that might be helpful.
At a previous employer, we had sort of it was a numerical reasoning test. So basically a math test, and we had people sort of just no, not doing it. Hate maths, not doing it. And eventually we just put it in the job ad. That's what we do. Everyone does this. It's more like a badge of honor to get through it than to not do it, because everyone had to do it. There wasn't really a high watermark for it. You didn't have to get a certain number to be included in the wonderful career that we were offering. But it was kind of that kind of, we just wanted people to do it for doing its sake. It was something around that submitting to the test. And I think in your example, if you've got like 200-300 people, then it serves that point. But people get that. I think at the volume end of the market, people are expecting to do a little bit more to get considered later on into those later processes as well.
I think that building it into the application process as opposed to them applying and then sending it out is actually, it's better for the candidate to do it. But also from your side, you remove some of that noise, which is there's going to be a dropout. Like people are applying, then getting a test, and then they're having to complete it. You're now having to track a whole new process, which is they've applied, you send an email, that's maybe automated, they've done the test, some have applied, some haven't. You're actually introducing a lot of complexity into the very early stages of your hiring process. I think if you can cut that out and just make it part of the application process, you remove some of that noise.
Great, thank you. Somebody else asked, what is your #1 tip for sourcing candidates in shortage occupation areas? They have extreme difficulty recruiting in some of their departments.
I think there's different things in different occupations. So again, using the example from insurance, and it was actuarial science that these people had to study. There aren't many actuaries in the world. Point blank. There just aren't many, because not many. It's not exactly the glamorous career that people want. Sorry to any actuaries that are listening. I don't think they are. So we can talk about them. We're fine. But he had to find different ways of doing this, smarter ways of doing this. So going through things like where they had studied and what professional boards that they might be members of. I think I've had in the past to recruit particularly really niche things. So a lawyer who had passed the bar in New York and London and spoke German with financial services experience. That's quite tough. That's certainly quite tough for me to find. But you can find lists of people who had passed the bar in New York and the bar in London. You can find the lists. You can actually merge those lists and then see who had done both. So there are ways around these things. Certainly for an organization which is finding it continually different, then you have to start looking at things, working again with that hiring manager, and start looking at things like what's the relocation package you're offering to go outside of your geography, and then is it possible to grow your own, as we say, which is to go out, find a more junior version of what you want, and to actually mentor them up into what you want.
I think they're probably better examples than I actually have, but there's one thing I think, like employee referrals, I think there's sort of an expectation that employees will just refer people regardless. They've seen the job in the careers page, they'll go for it. Like in my experience, you have to do way more than that. Like you have to know the people in your business who are likely to be the good referrers for a job. So I'll use the last hire that I made as an example again. I went to our existing product marketing associate, who's fantastic, and said, right, I want to hire another one of you. How do I do that? And it's perhaps the most diverse way of hiring, but she's excellent. And it wasn't just people she'd worked with before, because there wasn't so much of that previous work experience. It was, where do I find people like you? And actually going and speaking to her and actually working out, okay, maybe it's someone who's come from your alumni, from your college, okay, you can post to your alumni job board, fantastic. Let's get that job ad that we spent a lot of time making sure it's great onto that job board to try and attract someone from there, which maybe isn't an obvious first step when you just sort of think, well, let's get the job out there. And that's actually how we hired that person. So it wasn't sort of a direct referral. It wasn't someone born you already, but it was someone that she could get us in touch with that we couldn't do without her. And so I think that's sometimes going beyond just the who do you know as to how can you actually tap into your network to find people similar with similar skill sets or experience.
I've actually seen a brute force example of that, which is built into the onboarding for people in their first day. They sit down with the recruiter, open up their LinkedIn with the list of vacancies and say, who do you know? I think that particular employer called it a ninja hunt, which I wasn't that happy about. But that it worked. It worked because people don't have that instant top of mind recollection. Oh yeah, I know that person, and they make more hires that way. So that kind of brute force, that kind of referrals, which are pulled rather than pushed from the referrer, it definitely has a space. And I think people do tend to know. I mean, again, if we're going back to Google Scholar and where you studied and these professional trade bodies, when you went to the last meeting, anyone you saw, when you went to uni, who was in your dorm, all of this sort of stuff. Those are those networks which won't be immediately top of mind, which with a little bit of coaxing you might get access to.
Perfect. I think maybe we can answer one more question really quickly. Somebody said, has employer branding had an effect on the way you recruit? And I think it would actually be interesting to know what you think those with maybe not the strongest employer brand should do.
I can start here with a workable example. So we opened our office in Boston 3 years ago with 2 people. We're now about 60, 65 in Boston. So although Workable as a company has many, many customers, our employer brand, as it were, didn't exist in Boston. We've never had people here, and that comes with challenges. And yes, we do still have to try and grow that, but initially we had to just accept that that was the case, that we didn't have a strong employer brand, that people weren't searching for jobs at Workable, and that's where making sure that when we advertised a job, we were getting it out as much as we could, because we couldn't rely on people just coming to us knowing, well, Workable is a great company to work with there in Boston. So we would use the free job boards. We would try and find niche job boards. So here was sort of Venture Fears and Bostino, which are Boston-specific job boards that we could start advertising to. And over time, that started to become less of an issue. We had more employees who gave more referrals, who talked to more friends, and it's now starting to establish an employer brand, and we go to a few events each year to make sure that that is still in place. So we've had that experience. I don't think employer brand is something you can build overnight, and to some extent you just have to accept it as a limitation when you start planning to hire. But yes, perhaps you'll have to get a sort of third-party recruiter to help with a certain role that for us in, say, one of our other offices in London or Athens, perhaps we wouldn't have to. But here it's a bit different. Our employer brand actually travels the world, and it wasn't as strong here as it was elsewhere. And so it's not just one company brand, it's actually geographic in how it travels.
Often the employer brand can work against you. And people don't realize this. There's like a tipping point for employer brand, which is when people have such brand awareness that they have preconceived ideas about you. So I think of somewhere like Facebook, where I would phone someone up and they would say, I hate Facebook. And you're like, oh, thank you very much, goodbye. And that was the end of that, because they had that preconceived notion. Similarly, I worked for a high-frequency trading company out of Chicago, phoning people up there. We didn't have any employer brand because we were so secretive around what we did, and that was the nature of the industry, that you could kind of paint your own picture. That was also bad, because then people thinking you were biased, thinking you were just pushing your own agenda. I think there's a brilliant point somewhere in the middle, which is you get to be a little bit authentic about things and say, actually, no, we're not so good at that. You know, that's not our sweet spot. We're great at these things. We're not so good at this point. And then you get a lot more sort of a lot more engagement from people because you seem more authentic. And that can be on a one-to-one basis, where it's tell me the 6 things that will make this job for you. 6, Matthew. 6 things that will make this job work for you, and you go, oh, we only do 5 of them. We're never going to do that. We'll never touch that thing. Is that still okay? Because you've been authentic, you get that bite. And at the mass scale, you get this employer brand. And I think it's been interesting. So I've worked in companies where they have consciously gone out to almost reputation manage the company and do employer branding. And I think the mistake they've made is that it's something that they totally control. And the employer brand happens partly between what you're doing and partly from what people are actually going to assume about your business. The things I've seen done best in the employer branding circle are having the awareness that while you're searching and using all these crazy sourcing techniques, your candidates are also coming back and looking for those sort of breadcrumbs to learn about your business. So they're not just going to be on Glassdoor. They're going to look at what content you're going to put out there. They're going to look at the developer blog or the employee blog. They're going to look at employee Facebook page if you have one, all of that sort of stuff. So employer brand doesn't just sort of, it's not a top-down sort of hammer that you just beat people with. It's actually sort of everything, and you've got to try and put enough out there that there's a process of discovery on their side as well, because they have the same bias as we all do. If they discover it, it's probably more true than if you tell it to them. So make lots of things discoverable would be my answer. And don't worry too much about employer brand, because it can work against you when you get super big.
Great, thank you. We have gone a little bit over, so we're going to end the webinar here, but I'll send a follow-up email with a recap of what we talked about and any relevant links, especially the recording and the slides for you to reference later. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, everyone.